everybody. So, if you remember from last Sunday that I taught, I taught on the life of Samson, and I got through Judges 13 through 14, but we still have halfway to go. So this is part 2 of Samson's life. So if you recall, we learned about Samson marrying that strange, nagging woman. His killing spree with the 30 Philistine men after his riddle that he gave at his wedding. And we left right after he killed those 30 Philistine men. So if you turn to the book of Judges, Judges chapter 15. And we'll begin there, and like I did last time, I'll say a few verses, and then I'll explain it, and then I'll do that, so forth. So Judges chapter 15, verse 1 through 3 says, "But it came to pass within a while after, in the time of a wheat harvest, that Samson visited his wife with a kid. And he said, I will go into my wife into the chamber, but her father would not suffer him go in. And her father said, I verily thought that thou hast utterly hated her, therefore I gave her to thy companion. Is not her younger sister fairer than she? Take her, I pray thee, instead of her. And Samson said concerning them, Now shall I be more blameless than the Philistines, though I do them a displeasure." So, at the time of the wheat harvest, Samson goes to visit his wife, that he had just married, but was given to his best man at the wedding. And he visits her with a gift, a kid. And the kid, the King James Version renders a kid as the young male goat. So that's what a kid means. And he went and tried to go visit her, but he was stopped by her father, or his father-in-law. And his father tells him that he thought Samson hated her, but he'll let him marry his other daughter, take her younger sister. And there's two things that we can see from this. Is there's something special about this one woman, because there was a lot of other prettier ladies in the city, including her sister, but there was something about this woman that really stuck out to him. And two, the proposal that Samson was given by his father-in-law was really an insult to him, because he offers up his daughter for marriage, but it was unlawful for an Israelite to do this in Leviticus 18:18. And of course, to soften the insult, he said that he would give up his daughter for marriage. He was probably intimidated by Samson after he heard of the 30 killings of the Philistines. So then in verse 3, Samson gets rather provoked and retaliates, and he says that now he has a good reason to hurt the Philistines, and no one will blame him for it. So then we'll read verses 4 through 6, and verses 4 through 6 says, "And Samson went and caught 300 foxes, and took firebrands, and turned tail to tail, and put a firebrand in the midst between two tails. And when he had set the brands on fire, he let them go into the standing corn of the Philistines, and burn up both the shocks and also the standing corn with the vineyards and olives. Then the Philistines said, Who hath done this? And they answered, Samson, the son-in-law of the Timnite, because he had taken his wife, and because her to his companion. And the Philistines came up and burnt her and her father with fire." So here's what Samson prepares to do to the Philistines after this. He takes 300 foxes, and he gets 2 of them at a time and ties their tails together, and he tied a torch between each pair. So he lit the torches and that were between the foxes' tails, and let them run through the grain fields of the Philistines. In this way he burnt all of their crops, all their grain they had cut. He also burned up their vineyards and their olive trees. So then one of the Philistine people asked who did that, and someone from the crowd said that it was Samson. And so what was the most logical thing for the Philistines to do? Well, they thought it was to burn Samson's wife and her father, assumingly in their very own household, out of fear of Samson. But they decided to go burn her and her father. So now verses 7 through 8 says, And Samson said unto them, Though ye have done this, yet I will be avenged of you, and after that I will cease. And he smote them hip and thigh with a great slaughter, and he came down and dwelt in the top of rock Etam. So he, whenever it says that he smote them hip and thigh, it's a proverbial expression for merciless slaughter. We're not told yet that he has a designated weapon of war. So far that we know, he's just using his fists and his legs. This is how strong he is, and so he either beat them on their hips and thighs with his bare hands, and they died of their deep wounds and bruises, or he hit them with his legs on their thighs. It's really unknown, but devastating nonetheless. And in martial arts, in Taekwondo, we were fighting once, and if you turn to your side, and someone can get a side kick right on the edge of your thigh here, that will disarm you. It will put you down on the ground. And then if you don't know how to fight on the ground, it'll leave you there defenseless. So it could be that that's what he did. And then he decides to stay in a cave named the Rock of Etam. So now read verses 9 through 17. Then the Philistines went up and pitched in Judah and spread themselves in Lehi. And the men of Judah said, Why are ye come up against us? And they answered, To bind Samson are we to come up, to do to him as he had done to us. But 3,000 men of Judah went up to the top of the rock of Etam, and said to Samson, Knowest thou not that the Philistines are rulers over us? What is it that thou hast done unto us? And he said unto them, As they did unto me, so I have done unto them. And they said unto him, We are come down to bind thee, that we may deliver thee into the hand of the Philistines. And Samson said unto them, Swear unto me, that ye will not fall upon me yourselves. And they spake unto him, saying, No, but we will bind thee fast, and deliver thee into their hand. But surely we will not kill thee. And they bound him with 2 new cords, and brought him up from the rock. And when he came unto Lehi, the Philistines shouted against him, and the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him. And the cords whereupon his arms became as flax, that they burnt with fire, and his hands and his bands loosed from his hands. And he found a new jawbone of an ass, and put forth his hand, and took it, and slew 1,000 men therewith. And Samson said, With the jawbone of an ass, heaps upon heaps, with the jaw of an ass I have slain 1,000 men. And it came to pass, when he made an end of speaking, that he had cast away the jawbone out of his hands, and called that place, I wrote down how to pronounce that word, but he called it that.
Ramathali.
Yeah, Ramathali. There we go. And so here we're told that the Philistines went to the land of Judah, and they stopped near a place, Lekeh, and their army camped there. Now the tribe of Judah, in shock, asked why on earth they were there. And the Philistines answered and said that they were there to take Samson. And the camp of Judah wondered if they were there to fight them. But they were relatively relieved that they weren't, and then they decided to go up with 3,000 men to tie up Samson and take him to the Philistines. Now, Samson doesn't really fear them, but he knows he can't take them because he doesn't want to shed innocent blood. And this is kind of like Christ. Christ is betrayed by the Jews, thrown into the hands of the Romans. And although Christ could have easily escaped with his strength, he would not. He was given into the hands of his enemies by his friends, so that his own people would go free. And then back here in the Old Testament with Samson, they replied that they would not harm Samson. They agreed to that. They said, but just as the Jews did not physically harm Christ, but they let his enemies do that. Just as the Jews gave Jesus to the Roman officials, this camp gave Samson unto the Philistines and took him to the Philistine officials. Now, when they took him, the Philistines were shouting with joy. Joyful because they had no need to fear Samson anymore. Or so they thought. Because if you remember, not only were his hands tied, but his arms were tied. So they really tied him up. But if you remember how strong he was, just able to snap that lion's neck, he broke the ropes like wax before fire, like snow before the sun. He just melted away. Just as Christ loosed himself from the cords of death in Acts 2:24. Of course, that's not what they're actually called, but that's what some people have called them. And if you notice in the verse, not were his hands tied, but his arms. So he was really tied up with new cords as well. Now in 15, Samson found a jawbone of a dead donkey. Presumably one that had flesh on it, or was pretty still alive, because if it were old, it would be dry and breakable. Now, what does Samson do with this interesting find? He finds that whenever he was uncorded, well, he took it and killed 1,000 Philistine men with it. And then afterwards, in verse 16, he humbly and elegantly says that the jaw of an ass have I slain 1,000 men. When Samson finished speaking, he threw the jawbone down and called it Ramethelek, or Ramethleki. That's how Strong's Bible Dictionary says to pronounce it. I found it. Now, this would seem to indicate that whenever the name Lehi is used in Judges 15:9, is used prolifically. Because this name was given by the deed of Samson. Now, I'll read verses 18 through 20. And he was sore athirst, and called unto the Lord, and said, Thou hast given this great deliverance into the hand of thy servant. And now shall I die for thirst, and fall into the hand of the uncircumcised? But God clave an hollow place that was in the jaw, and there came water thereout. And when he had drunk, his spirit it came again, and he had revived, wherefore he called the name thereof Enhanakor, which is in Lehi unto this day. And he judged Israel in the days of the Philistines 20 years. So, after he finished brutally killing the 1,000 soldiers after being bound, he was thirsty. He was really thirsty. And he called out to God in prayer when he needed him. And he said, he first thanked the Lord for delivering him through that battle. Then he asked, Please don't let me die from thirst now. Please don't let me be captured by the men who aren't even circumcised. And God doesn't let him. In verse 19, we're told that there was a hollow place in the socket of the tooth where water came out for Samson. Now, when I was reading this, Jameson, Fawcett, Brown, John Gill, and Albert Barnes says that there was supposed to be translated into Lehi, as in the ground. Either way, it doesn't really change the story that much. It doesn't change anything significantly. Either way, it was a miracle for Samson, a miracle from God, God answering his prayer. Now, in verse 20, although not in full power of the country, Samson judges Israel for another 20 years. Or he has been judging Israel for 20 years, depending on how you look at that. Now, we'll go on to verse 16, or chapter 16, read verses 1 through 3. Then went Samson to Gaza, and saw there an harlot, and went in unto her. And was told the Gazites, saying, Samson is come hither. And they compassed him, and laid wait for him all night in the gate of the city, and were quiet all night, saying, In the morning, when it is day, we shall kill him. And Samson lay till midnight, and arose at midnight, and took the doors of the gate off of the city, and the two posts, and went away with them, bar and all, and put them upon his shoulders, and carried them up to the top of the hill, that is, before Hebron. So, by now, Samson is pretty famous. Killing 1,000 Philistine men will do that to you. It'll make you famous. And so he was famous in Gaza especially, and he saw a prostitute there and wanted to stay with her for the night. And someone in the crowd told the people of Gaza, Samson has come here. And they wanted to kill him. So they surrounded the city and waited there all night, quiet all night. And they said to each other, when the morning comes, we'll kill Samson. But Samson only stayed with the prostitute until midnight. Whether he heard about it or not, he only had plans to stay there until midnight. Then he got up, and the verse explains how he did this. He grabbed the doors of the city gate, pulled them loose from the wall, and then he pulled down the doors, the two posts, and the bars that locked the door shut. He put them on his shoulders and carried them to the top of the hill near the city of Hebron. So now, read verses 4 through 10. Verse 4 through 10 says, And it came to pass afterward that he loved a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. And the lords of the Philistines came up unto her, and said unto her, Entice him, and see wherein his great strength lieth, and by what means we may prevail against him, that we may bind him to afflict him. And we may give three every one of us 1,100 pieces of silver. And Delilah said unto Samson, Tell me, I pray thee, wherein thy great strength lieth, and wherewith thou mightest be bound to afflict thee. And Samson said unto her, If they bind me with 7 green withs, then that were never dried, then shall I be weak, and be as another man. Then the lords of the Philistines brought up to her 7 green withs, which had not been dried, and she bound him with them. Now there were men lying in the chamber, and she said unto him, The Philistines be upon thee, Samson. And he brake the withs, as a thread of tow is broken when it toucheth the fire. So his strength was not known. And Delilah said unto Samson, Behold, thou hast mocked me and told me lies. Now behold me, now tell me, I pray thee, wherewith thou mightest be bound. So later, Samson falls in love with a woman named Delilah, who was from Sorek Valley. Evidently, the rulers of the Philistines heard about this. Or maybe not the rulers, but some Philistines officials heard about this and went to Delilah and said they want to know what makes Samson strong. Mm-hmm. Try to trick him into knowing, and to try to figure out his secret. And then, when we are able to control him, each of us will give you 28 pounds of silver. They probably expected his strength to come from something external, like an amulet or something. They had no idea it was his hair. If they did know, they would have been trying to cut it off already, but they had no idea it was his hair. They wanted to find out and used his love against him because that's proven to work before. So, pretending to want to know out of pure curiosity, Delilah said to Samson, "Tell me why you're strong. How could someone tie you up and make you helpless?" Samson evidently lies to Delilah and says, "Someone would have to tie me up with 7 fresh new bowstrings. If someone did that, I would be weak as any other man." Then the rulers of the Philistines brought 7 fresh new bowstrings to Delilah, and she tied Samson with them. And they snapped like a string when it comes too close to a flame, the Bible describes it as. And the Philistines still did not know the secret to his strength. So then, verse 10 through 12 says, "And Delilah said unto Samson, Behold, thou hast mocked me, and told me lies. Now tell me, I pray thee, wherewith thou mightest be bound. And he said unto her, If they bind me fast with new ropes that were never occupied, then shall I be weak, and be as another man. Delilah therefore took new ropes, and bound him therewith, and said unto him, The Philistines be upon thee, Samson. And there were liars in wait abiding in the chamber, and he brake them from off his arms like a thread." So she used the same mentality as his ex-wife did, and tries to get him to reveal his secret. And he kind of tries to make it sound as if he didn't lie the first time. So he said, "Oh, sorry, they have to be unoccupied strings. They have to be ones that were never used before. They have to be new strings." So he kind of softens the hit with that. Delilah, wanting this some of my, tries it on Samson. He broke it easily, as if they were threads. Now, try it again, 13 and 14. "And Delilah said unto Samson, Hitherto thou hast mocked me, and told me lies. Tell me wherewith thou mightest be bound. And he said unto her, If thou weavest the 7 locks of my head with the web. And she fastened it with the pin, and said unto him, The Philistines be upon thee, Samson. And he awakened out of his sleep, and went away with the pin of the beam, and with the web." So it didn't work again. Samson lied to her again, and Samson said that if you use the loom to weave the 7 braids of my hair on my head and tighten it with a pin, I'll become as weak as any other man. You see, he starts getting to that his strength comes from his hair. He kind of gets to it, but he takes a while. He says later, whenever they fall asleep, well, Samson falls asleep, Delilah fastened the loom onto the ground with the tent peg. Again, she called out to him that the Philistines are going to capture him. Samson pulled up the tent peg, the loom, and the shuttle. So now here's where his secret is revealed. Verses 15 through 22. "And she said unto him, How canst thou say, I love thee, when thine heart is not with me? Thou hast mocked me with these 3 times, and hast not told me wherein thy great strength lieth." You see, this is what his ex-wife did too. This is what his previous wife had said to her, accused him of not loving her. But anyways, verse 16 through 22 says, "And it came to pass, when she pressed him daily with her words, and urged him, so that his soul was vexed unto death." You see, this was used with his other wife again. He kept on nagging at him, and eventually he was so upset that he's about to tell. He felt like he was going to die, figuratively. His soul was vexed unto death. He was so annoyed with her. And verse 17 says, And he told her all this heart, and said unto her, There hath not come a razor upon mine head, for I have been a Nazarite unto God from my mother's womb. If I be shaven, then my strength will go from me, and I shall become weak, and I will become like any other man. So he reveals the secret here. And 18 says, And when Delilah saw that he had told her all his heart, she could tell this time. She could tell. This time was the time that he had told her a secret. Then the lords of the Philistines came up unto her and brought money in their hand. And she made him sleep upon her knees. And she called for a man, and she caused him to shave off the 7 locks of his head. And she began to afflict him, and his strength went from him. And she said, The Philistines be upon thee, Samson. And he awoke out of his sleep, and said, I will go out as the other times before I shake myself. And he wist not that the Lord was departed from him. So he revealed his secret to Delilah, finally. He felt like he was going to die, figuratively, because she kept on bothering Samson day after day, really bugging him about it, trying to figure it out, just as his other wife did with the riddle. She does this too, to find out the secret to his strength. Only this was far worse than the riddle. This was the secret to his long-wondered strength. And so Samson told Delilah everything. Delilah got paid, and she had someone cut off the 7 braids of Samson's hair. So then Samson's strength has left him. And then verse 21 says, But the Philistines took him and put out his eyes and brought him down to Gaza and bound him with fetters of brass, and he did grind in the prison house. Howbeit the hair of his head began to grow back after he was shaven. So after she gets him captured, the first thing they do is to make sure that he doesn't go away. He can't see. Really taking away his eyes really would disable him, because he can't fight very well if he can't see what's wrong with him. So they put out his eyes, and according to the Arabic version, they blinded him by putting fire into his eyes. So they took a hot, sharp stone, put heaps of ashes in, really pulled out his eyes. There was no chance of him being able to see again. And the Jews say that this was done in just retaliation, measure for measure. Samson, they say, went after his eyes, that is, by taking one harlot after another. Therefore, the Philistines put out his eyes. Regardless of how or what their intentions were for putting out his eyes, I think they just did it so he could do no more harm to them, and they could finish what they started. And so then they took him down to the city of Gaza. They put chains on him to keep him from running away, and they put him in the prison and made him grind. Context suggests that he was grinding grain. And in verse 22, we learn his hair began to grow back. So the Philistines may have been clever, but they weren't that clever. While he was grinding, while he was thinking about everything, grinding, there were no water or windmills. Everything had to be done by hand, and it was a hard process. His hair began to grow back, and probably a lot faster than normal. But anyways, we read verse 23 through 27, and this is beginning the end of his life. But 23 through 27 said, Then the lords of the Philistines gathered them together for an offer of great sacrifice unto Dagon their god, and to rejoice, for they said, Our God hath delivered Samson, our enemy, into our hand. And when the people saw him, they praised their God, for they said, Our God hath delivered into our hands our enemy and the destroyer of our country, which slew many of us. And it came to pass, when their hearts were merry, that they said, Call for Samson, that he may make us sport. And they called for Samson out of the prison house, and he made them sport. And they set him between the pillars. And Samson said unto the lad that had held him by the hand, Suffer me, that I may feel the pillars, whereupon the house standeth, that I may lean upon them. Now the house was full of men and women, and all were lords of the Philistines were there. And there were upon the roof about 3,000 men and women that beheld, while Samson made sport. So the Philistines wanted to have a celebration, probably because they got Samson. They were praising their god Dagon, and they said that their God help us defeat Samson, our enemy. And there were about 3,000 men and women here. And one of the young lads, a young child, that was helping him get inside, well, not helping him, but helping the Philistines get him inside, he said, Hey, put me between the two pillars of the building. He was already planning his next plan. Remember, he planned to kill those 3,000, or kill those 1,000 Philistine men. He was hatching a plan here. He went to go stand in between those two pillars. And now, verse 28 through 31. This is the end of chapter 16 and the end of Samson's life. It says, And Samson called unto the Lord and said, O Lord God, remember me, I pray thee, and strengthen me. I pray thee, and strengthen only this once, O God, that I may be at once avenged of the Philistines for my two eyes. And Samson took hold of the two middle pillars upon which the house stood, and on which it was borne up, of the one with his right hand, and the other was his left. And Samson said, Let me die here with the Philistines. And he bowed himself with all his might. And the house fell upon the lords, and upon all the people that were there within. So the dead which he slew, his death were more than they which slew in his life. And I'm not going to read verse 31. That's basically talking about them going to go get Samson's body. But perhaps mentally he prays, or loudly or just quietly to himself while they were all partying. At that party, he asked God to give him strength one last time. Punish these Philistines for tearing out both my eyes. And although he mentioned his eyes, this was not from a private spirit of revenge for him. He was a judge of Israel, whose office it was to be a revenger, to execute wrath, and to be a protector of Israel. He was fulfilling his mission one last time to protect Israel. He finishes his conquest as a judge. And in verse 29, Samson took hold of the two columns. He braced himself, and he took them down, killing the 3,000 Philistines. He cried out, Let me die with these Philistines. In verse 30, he pushed as hard as he could, and the temple fell on the rulers and everyone in it. In this way, Samson killed more than he has ever killed before. More than he ever killed before. And Samson desired their death and was pleased with his life that he had lived. Samson, again proving to be a type of Christ, freely laid down his life for his people, that he might destroy his and their enemies. Now, I'm going to close, but I want to point out 4 things that we need to take from the story of Samson. 1, the deeper we allow ourselves to be in sin, the more blind we become. and soon enough it will grind against us, just as it did to Samson. Samson was spiritually blind long before he was blinded. When the Philistines bound him, just then did he swallow his pride and fully trust God. Number 2, Samson demonstrated he was a very vengeful man and got upset if things didn't go his way. He proved that he was that kind of person all throughout his life up until the end. This didn't work out very well for him. His wife was killed. His wife's father was killed. But this was the mindset of the Philistines as well. Judges 15:10. But is contrary to Christ's. Matthew 5:38. Number 3, God would rather forgive than judge. In the final overview, God saw Samson as a man of true faith and honor. He's listed in the famous Hall of Faith in Hebrews 11:32. This is why I think that Samson didn't go suicide whenever he was doing it. I don't think he purposely intended for just himself to die. He was listed as a true man of faith and honor. So number 4, and this is the last one, Samson let himself be used by God for a greater purpose in life. Right now, God is willing to meet us right where we are and take us where he wants, but only if you let him. James 4:8. I thank you for your attention, and I pray this has been a blessing to you.